human will is so powerful that decision is the prime lever for the result of finding what their calling is. Some people only have to make that decision and then keep looking, and then they find it. In fact, a lot of people that happens. And it's just a question of how long it takes to do it. Then the second thing to do is to go into what I call a state of inquiry, where the person surrenders to a strategy of finding out. It's a strategy of receptivity combined with curiosity. And then they go through whatever experiences they need to go through to find what is true for them. Most people find that they have, if they look back over their life, most people can remember points in their life where they suddenly had an incredibly powerful, life-changing insight. And a lot of people have experienced that many times. If someone looks at that in their life and asks themselves, what was going on when that happened? Where was I? What was I doing? Who was I with? Remember as much as possible about that situation where the insight occurred. That gives somebody a clue as to their own personal key or keys for unlocking their inner truths. So that's very different for everybody. And then there comes a point when somebody just knows that they found it, because as I mentioned before, there's that feeling of rightness all through the body. A friend of mine describes it as all your planets are in alignment. Is a nice way of putting it. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's a nice way of putting it. Or all your ducks are in a row. There's just that feeling of everything feels, oh my God, this is it for me.
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out, or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call, and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode. Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Catherine Llewellyn. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you so much, Thomas.
It is very much my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I have a podcast. It's called Truth and Transcendence, and I've been doing that for 2.5 years. And that's a place where people come on and talk about finding their truth and experiencing transformative effects as a result of doing that. So that's a big part of what I'm doing. I'm also the founder of Being Space, which I've recently started actually. And through that, I'm offering workshops, which are all about personal growth of one sort or another, energy healing treatments, and also mentoring coming from the humanistic psychology basis. So that's all the kind of the stuff I'm doing now, apart from wandering around the hills in Wales and rescuing cats. I've recently rescued a cat, which I'm now rehabilitating. And it's amazing how that takes more energy than most client projects have ever had. So life is never quite as one foresees it.
Well, thank you for the introduction. And I find what immediately occurred to me was that when you're interviewing people as a host, often it's the case that you actually don't get to hear about the story of the host. You get to hear about many stories, but not necessarily of the person who's doing the interviewing. So would you like to, in relation to your podcast, what you talk to people about, maybe finding your true calling, for example, would you like to share what that is for you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. My overall purpose in what I'm doing, it's going to sound a bit pompous, is to contribute to the evolution of mankind through the elevation of consciousness. So that's my overall calling. And I'm doing that through helping individuals, whether one-on-one or in group settings, to elevate their own consciousness in their own lives and experience transformation in their lives. So that's my calling, and that has been my calling for a very long time. I haven't always been quite as overt or open about that. Sometimes I haven't told people that's what my purpose is until we've been working together for 18 months or something, by which time they say, yeah, I could have worked that out, Catherine. I think I knew that, you know. But now that's what I say up front to people.
Okay. And I struggle. I'm quite a literal person. So in terms of what that would look like if you were trying to help someone with doing that, is that could you tell me a bit more? I'm not sure I quite follow in terms of the literal interpretation of what that would be.
So if someone comes on one of these workshops, they spend 2 days with me and a small number of other people. It's a maximum of 8 participants in the group. People talk about what comes up for them when they start engaging at this sort of level, which is very often ego stuff, as well as a sense of wonder and appreciation, you know, all the things that come up when we try to take ourselves to another level or connect more with our higher self. All the reasons why we've not done that before come up and smack us in the face. So in my workshops, people talk about those things. We discuss them. We don't try and squash them or get rid of them or judge them. We go, oh, that's interesting, right? Let's talk about that. You know, where's that coming from? How's it affecting you? And usually on the other side of that, there's a piece of brilliance or insight that's available for that person. So that's one example, the Pellower workshop. Another example would be someone comes to me for one-to-one mentoring. And the first conversation, of course, I will say, so why have you wanted to talk to me? And sometimes they've got a clear idea about that, and sometimes they haven't. Quite often they've just heard me on a podcast, or a friend who's worked with me has told them about me, and they've just got this feeling that there's something more for them in their life, but they're not necessarily sure what it is, but it's just around the corner, and they know they could do with some assistance trying to find it and connect with it. And once we then start talking about, so what is it in your life which feels really right for you at the moment? And what is it that doesn't? And what is your sense of what you'd like more of? What is it that you are yearning for? Where are you? And what do you wish for, kind of a thing? And then I put together like a structured program for that person based on what we've discussed, which about where they are and where they want to go, but also based on what they've told me about their existing capabilities and faculties and capacities and qualities, so that we use those, because they've got those already, as key resources for the work. And once we get into the work, it's one-to-one sessions with me, and then a lot of kind of research and inquiry and practice and meditation and all sorts of other things in between the sessions. So quite often they draw in people they're close to into the process, you know, by saying, look, I'm doing this. My relationship with you is terribly important to me. I would love to talk to you about some aspect of what I'm doing, or can we please experiment with some of what I'm exploring? You know, is that all right with you? Or will you give me some feedback? Or, you know, and of course, if they're running a business, which often they are, those conversations they're having with their board, let's say, you know, where they're saying, or they may not talk to them about it. They may keep it completely private, at least to begin with. So that's kind of vague in a way, but what we're doing there in that one-to-one work is we're focusing on what is it that person's spirit really wants, and how can we help that person to rise up to meet that calling? You know, how can they clarify what that calling is, and how can they rise up to meet it? Because we all, in my opinion, we all have many levels to us. And some of those levels we're not very proud of. And some of those levels, if we're honest, we are proud of. So it's about using the aspects of ourselves that we are proud of already, including the ones that are absolutely magnificent that we aren't even aware of, to help us bring everything along to the place where we want to be. So those are just 2 examples of different ways I work with people.
Well, thank you for that. You mentioned in part of your answer about how the ego might come into play. What's an example of how that might happen?
Somebody says, why do I have to do that? I shouldn't have to do that. Which is kind of saying, do you know who I am? Do you not realize? Okay. And then the question, okay, so why would you not want to do that? And do you want me to explain again why I'm suggesting doing that in relation to the purpose that you said is what you wanted to do? And exploring that till we get to the point where we can see, then coming up with that reaction, is that because it would actually genuinely be a bad idea for them to do that thing that we're talking about? Or is it because doing it would be a fantastic idea for them, but there's a part of them that's resisting doing that? There's a part of them that's going, no, that's going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to feel awkward. I'm going to feel, what am I going to find out about myself? I just feel, no. Or maybe something like they've got some sort of assumption that they don't realize is an assumption. Like I had a client once who didn't want to do any role play ever, but he really wanted to improve his relationships with his colleagues at work and improve the way that he communicated at the board meetings. And I said, look, a role play is just a practice. You're just practicing something. It doesn't mean anything, And we dug down. He had a really strong, like visceral resistance to doing that. So instead of doing the role play, we did sessions about that, about the resistance. We explored the resistance, which in the event was much more relevant and helpful for him than actually doing the role play would have been. And the resistance came from some situations where he'd actually literally been abused, not as a child, but as an adult, at sort of management college situations where they forced everyone to do role play and where they did it really badly, and he was traumatized by that. But because he was a very senior bloke, he was a finance guy, you don't talk about your feelings at work. You certainly don't turn around and say, the trainer just traumatized me. You might as well just commit professional suicide. You just don't do that. But that had been like knotted inside him ever since for years. And we then realized that there were actually other things that had happened in his life and that still happened that he was just tolerating in people's behavior because part of him thought he had to. And that led to some really empowering work around, actually, no, you're a much more mature man now than you were then. You know a lot more. You've got a much greater emotional capacity now. You can actually now communicate and say to people, you don't seem to realize that when you do that, that's really undermining and unhelpful to what we're trying to do in the business or to me personally. And that's a problem, So
it's very interesting.
We might have got to that same place through the role play, but we got to it through another route.
Do you think that should we say that protection, the ego, do you think that has something to do with trauma in all instances or just kind of in some instances?
I would say not in all instances necessarily. Sometimes it's simply because there's a pattern that they have picked up from parental figures or equivalent parental figures or watching a movie. In the old days, we used to do the example of Clint Eastwood that most people probably nowadays don't even know who that is. But he had this amazing sort of very cool, strong, silent type, image about him. And there was generations of young men who started taking that on because it looked really powerful. And Clint Eastwood always won. He was always the winner and he always looked damn cool doing it. And the women loved him, so that became like a piece of ego programming for a lot of people that they just followed, not realizing that Clint Eastwood himself, the actual human being, is a very feeling man, in fact. So they're just picking up on that one persona that's being presented, and it's not the whole story. And any single persona that we're presenting is never the whole story for us. And by definition, that then cuts us off from the juicy goodness that we have within us. And it cuts us off from our flexibility. And that's ego, because ego is about identity and persona and looking a certain way and being in control and getting people's approval and admiration. It's about all of those, I would say, more surface things. It's not about the true beating heart and the, burning spirit and everything else within us.
Almost like an inherited belief system.
Exactly right, which we all have. All our belief systems are inherited. We don't develop, or rather, all our unconscious belief systems are inherited. Some of us have developed conscious belief systems ourselves as adults, but it's very hard to know the difference, really, in the end, because we cannot unravel all of our conditioning. We just don't have time. And besides, what a miserable life that would be to spend your whole time trying to do that. I tried at one time when I first heard about this. I thought, great, all I've got to do is clear out all my unconscious beliefs and all my unprocessed baggage. If I do that, I'll be magnificent, be all good. So I started trying to do it. I thought, I literally believed I could clear the whole thing. And before long, I realized that it's not possible to do that in a lifetime. And even if it was, that would be a miserable lifetime. You'd have no time to enjoy the fruits of it.
Would you say you're probably picking new belief systems up as you go as well? So you'd be sort of constantly unraveling them. Is that fair?
Absolutely right. Yeah. So in fact, that kind of is a nice prompt. So the key is to develop a capacity for tuning in to thinking for oneself. Because if we can do that, we can practice that and get strong in that and live from that, then whatever belief system comes towards us, we're not frightened of it. We're not passive to it. We can consider it. We can reflect on it. We can research it. We can talk about it, but it's not going to get into us and take us over unless we choose to bring it in which case it's still not taking us over, because we know we are, in fact, autonomous. We are responsible for our own responses. And that's a great place to be. But in order to be in that place, we have to admit that what we don't know is much greater than what we do know. Because if we don't do that, we cannot really think for ourselves, because we're constantly trying to bolster that sense of believing that we know all the answers.
Do you have like a tool?
Sorry?
Or do you have a tool or a way of knowing whether it's an inherited belief system or something that you truly believe for yourself?
I wouldn't say a tool, but I would say there are some things that somebody can kind of tune into to begin to explore that question. One of them is what's going on in the body. So if what's going on in the body is a feeling of ease, relaxation, along with energy, comfort, that what I might call a feeling of rightness or a feeling of yes, then it's more probably something that you really believe in now, in the moment. If in the body there's more kind of tightness, fear, all the kind of stress reactions, it's more likely then that it's to do with something past, because those stress reactions, when we experience them, are that very, very often they're more to do with something from the past than they are genuinely to do with something in the moment. Because I'm talking about you and me and a lot of the people in our circle and in our country and so forth. We are privileged. We are not really in danger, hardly ever. If someone shouts at us, so what? If we have a big reaction to someone shouting at us, it's probably a lot to do with stuff from the past, which if that wasn't kind of acting in us or operating in us, we'd be just like, mate, that's rude, because you're not. You know what I mean? We're like, okay, I'm just leaving now. Or are you having a bad day? Do you need a cup of tea? What's going on? We'd be more rational in response. we less victim. You know, if the body is going into a victim mode, it's much more likely to do with past thing for us.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
comes back to what you said about the where that belief is, because if you are feeling, I don't know if this is the right word, but dis-ease, then you're probably, it's probably some sort of unconscious response. Whereas if you're feeling quite comfortable, like you say, this is a conscious belief that I've thought through. I've actually not thought about that. It's a really good point.
But I just will add to that, you know, when I say comfort, you might feel angry, you might feel sad, you might feel, you know, fearful, but those feelings will be vivid and present for you. They won't be heavy and sticky and pulling you down and dragging your energy. They will be alive and present in the moment. And that's an experience of aliveness. And that's an experience where we know that we're feeling something that's relevant, and we need to bear that in mind when we consider our response. So it's data, it's useful data, rather than cloying, draining stuff, you know, hanging on our shoulders, dragging us down.
So the people who are particularly, should we say, stressed or feeling negative, would you say it's most likely the fact that they've got belief systems or perhaps ego or you know, all that negative stuff, they've taken a lot of that with them, and that's how they're sort of operating in the world?
That's too much of a generalization for me to completely agree with it. I would say it's certainly it's for those people, it's certainly worth them asking that question of themselves. Could that be what's going on? But I will also say, you know, if you put someone in a very, very bad situation for an extended period, they're going to suffer, you know, and that's nothing to do with ego, or that's nothing to do with past stuff. It's because you've got them in a bad situation. You know, it's appropriate and relevant for us to feel bad if we're in a bad situation, but it's more about how we respond to the experience. So there's the nature of the experience, and then how we respond to it. There was a fantastic story that one of my teachers told me, which I'll probably get wrong, but there's a monastery in Tibet in this story, and they are invaded by Chinese soldiers, and they pull out the leader, you know, the head monk, and they have him kneeling down in the courtyard. And the head monk is just completely relaxed, apparently, which really annoys the head of the Chinese troop. And he says, "Why can you be so calm? Do you not realize that in a blink of an eye, I could put this sword through your head?" And the monk looks up at him and says, "Do you not realize that in the blink of an eye, I could have you put your sword through my head?" Now, I still get tingles when I hear or speak that story, because that's, to me, kind of ultimate responsibility for one's situation and one's experience. And that is an incredibly elevated level of consciousness for someone to be in, which I don't think I'll ever get there, you know, and I don't know anyone who is, and that story may not ever have happened. But who would have told it if it had happened? So that whole thing about, you know, how we respond to what's happened to us is really important.
So, and do you cover that with in your coaching?
Usually one way or another it comes in. I tend, because I've been doing the work I'm doing for a long, long time, I don't tend to have sort of like a list of topics that I'm going to go through with people. Apart, you know, if it's a specific thing, like I mentioned, the Pelawa workshop, that's somebody else's modality that they developed. They designed the workshop. I follow the structure because that's what's there. And I do sometimes do workshops where there's a structure which I follow, there's particular content. But when I'm doing the one-to-one work with people, it's much more intuitive than that. It's much more, I just bring in what is called for in the conversation as it unfolds, or through questioning, the client themselves will start to find these pieces of information for themselves without me having to state them. So it's a very organic, it's a relationship. You know, in a great relationship, extraordinary stuff happens, doesn't it? You know, you spend time with someone who you really love or a very good friend, and you're sort of changed by it in a good way. You're wiser somehow, you're a better person somehow. And it's not necessarily because that person taught you something or told you a piece of content or material. There's something about the dynamic between you where something changes for both of you for the better. And that's a big part of the one-to-one work that I do.
Have you got an example for yourself where you've the same thing has happened and you've responded to it completely differently as a result of, I'm going to call it the monk mindset in this context?
Yes, I would say that I'll give a personal example, my relationship with men that I'm in relationship with, if you like. So when I was much younger, there was a whole bunch of behaviors that a guy might do if I was involved with him that I would take really personally and get really upset about. And I would take it on myself and assume that there was either something wrong with me or that this was a really, no, I would take it on me. You know, I would have a low self-esteem thing based on the idea that, you know, it was supposed to be more like a fairy tale. You know, that kind of myth that a lot of people have when they're younger. It's supposed to be like a fairy tale. So if he's doing that behavior, it must mean there's something wrong with me. And it's his fault for making me feel that way. So he's making me feel less good about myself. That's his fault. So I'm going to make his life a misery. So all that would happen inside my unconsciously, I know about it now, but unconsciously. And all he would think was, she's being really reactive and I have no idea what's going on. I don't understand. Because he would be completely unconscious as well in relationship. Whereas now, if I'm involved with somebody and they do something that I don't like, I'm much more, my own sense of self is so much stronger now that I don't assume there's something wrong with me. I might say to that person, look, the way that you're behaving, is there something I've done or said that is actually that you don't like? Is there something that is kind of an issue for you? Because I'm really open to hearing it, if there is. If not, then I just need to let you know that thing that you've done, it may just be me, but it really doesn't work for me. I don't like it. It makes me feel like this, and I have this kind of reaction to it. And I can even now say to somebody, I'm aware that this part of the reaction is from past stuff. But this part of the reaction is in the present moment right now in my living room with you. It's easier for me to discriminate between the two. I know that it's absolute hubris to claim that I've got it 100%, right? So I can't say that. But I'm certainly a lot further along the path now, which means that it's also easier for him to do that with me as well. So it's easier to go much deeper, which of course creates much more space, sense of safety and intimacy. So, but I've gone through a lot of very hard lessons to get to that point. You know, sometimes where I've been taken aside by somebody to say, Catherine, are you mad? Do you not see what you're doing? Right. And sometimes I've resisted that. And other times I've welcomed it.
Well, I just want to say that that example of I would refer to it as like adult communication. Like most people in their relationships, significant other relationships, are on this sort of, I don't know, a hamster wheel of arguing with each other and not really knowing that they are, that unconscious behavior that you spoke of. And just having that example out there of what the positive, or I don't want to say it's the right way, because I'm not sure you would say that, but having a good example out there of what it might look like, I think that's just really valuable. So thank you for sharing it.
It's my pleasure. And the great thing nowadays is that there are people who specialize in that work. I've got a very close friend who specializes in relationship work with people, which includes the communication. It also includes the intimacy and sexuality and everything else, because his purpose in life is to increase the degree to which love is fully enacted in the world. That's his sort of banner for what he's doing. And he specializes in that. And there are many, many people now doing that. So people can come to a more generalist person like me and include that within what we're doing in relation to an example like that, or they can go to a specialist like that and really dive into it. And that's one of the great things these days. Whatever it is that you want to work on, there are multiple people out there who are very, very good at it, at helping people with it.
Well, I want to say that like, a lot of the theme of our conversation today has been around the unconscious versus the conscious, probably because that's a lot of what you specialize in. To what degree do you think, if you could put it to a percentage, to what degree are people completely unconscious in their behaviors and, you know, their everyday life versus their conscious mind where they're purposefully doing something? Have you ever thought about those numbers?
Oh, yes. As a practitioner, these conversations have occurred.
It's always a good thing when you say yes to that kind of question. It means
And
it's going
honestly,
somewhere.
after many, many, many conversations and much reading and research, I can honestly say I have no idea.
Well, that's the end of that one then.
The thing about it is when we're really conscious in the present, it's timeless and it's universal and it's infinite. And it feels like it's the whole of existence, right? And when we're really unconscious, that feels like the whole of existence interminably. So it's not possible to know the percentages. And in fact, the whole thing about consciousness is not a boundaried thing. It's not really a nameable or quantifiable thing. It transcends that whole level, because that's a whole cognitive level, which I celebrate, but it completely transcends the cognitive level, which is why when people say to me, what's this Pellower thing that you do? I basically tell them what it is. And they say, well, and I can't tell you anything else. You won't know any more unless you try it. And you won't try it unless you've got an appetite for experiencing something where you've no idea what's going to happen.
Well, I'd regret if I didn't ask you about this, because it's something that I've always pursued, if you like, unsuccessfully. And that is, I asked you earlier about like a true calling type thing. My interpretation of that is, and correct me if this is not the case, but it's sort of like your passion. So what would be your passion in life? So if I was to say such a generalized question as, how do you find your true calling or your passion? How would you answer that?
I have a whole program on how to do that, which is it's not
do
very
my
long
program.
Say again.
Do my program. That's the answer.
Well, I'm saying that to say it can't be answered in one question. So
Okay.
it's an inquiry. So it's the first thing that a person does is they make a decision that they want to find out what their calling is. And human will is so powerful that decision is the prime lever for the result of finding what their calling is. Some people only have to make that decision and then keep looking, and then they find it. In fact, a lot of people that happens. And it's just a question of how long it takes to do it. If someone's in a frame of mind which says, oh, I want to know what my calling is, but I don't know what it is, and nobody will tell me, and I don't know, it's not fair, I can't find out what my calling is, that's not going to work, because they haven't decided, they haven't committed to finding what it is. So that's the first thing to do. Then the second thing to do is to go into what I call a state of inquiry, where the person surrenders to a strategy of finding out. It's a strategy of receptivity combined with curiosity. And then they go through whatever experiences they need to go through to find what is true for them, which could include meditation, it could include discussion, it could include conscious dance, it could include painting, it could include all kinds of things. It's different for every person of what's going to really unlock it for them. You know, I think most people find that they have, if they look back over their life, most people can remember points in their life where they suddenly had an incredibly powerful, life-changing insight. And a lot of people have experienced that many times. If someone looks at that in their life and asks themselves, what was going on when that happened? Where was I? What was I doing? Who was I with? Remember as much as possible about that situation where the insight occurred. That gives somebody a clue as to their own personal key or keys for unlocking their inner truths. So that's very different for everybody. So when I'm helping someone do that, part of my job is to help them to do that, and then walk alongside them as they activate that to start finding information and then testing it and finding more and testing it and testing it and finding more and testing it. And then there comes a point when somebody just knows that they found it, because as I mentioned before, there's that feeling of rightness all through the body. A friend of mine describes it as all your planets are in alignment. Is a nice way of putting it. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's a nice way of putting it. Or all your ducks are in a row. There's just that feeling of everything feels, oh my God, this is it for me. So trusting that and not accepting something as a calling if you don't have that experience is really important.
I think that's fascinating and an amazing answer. And as you were explaining it, I was thinking about how it applies to me, and I think you have helped me, so I appreciate it.
Well, you've helped me as well. Thank you, because I'm about to make a video about that particular program, and you've helped me clarify my thinking about what I'm going to say.
Well, it's a great answer. So you've you already know you're going in strong. I appreciate your answers today. Is there anything that you would like to close with at all?
Yeah, just to really encourage everybody to trust the human superpower of thinking for ourselves. And remember, that's always an option, and it's always a really good idea, in my opinion.
100% agree. And for those people who want to follow you or get in touch with you, where do they go?
They go to beingspace.world. And on there, they'll find my podcast. If they just click podcast on the top menu, they'll find that. All the episodes are there. They'll find all my mentoring programs, workshops, treatments, ebooks, which are downloadable for free on a variety of topics that I find interesting. And a bit more about my whole philosophy around consciousness, which, you know, even if someone just took some of the content from that website and just stuck it on the wall and just reflected on it every day for a month, they would experience a fundamental shift. And if they listened to some of my podcast episodes as well, they would experience even more of a shift.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and for being a great podcast guest today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.